Why don't we go ahead and get this going? Thanks so much for showing up today. Before we get started, I want to thank a group that's been instrumental in getting this all set up and promoted. You probably saw as you were walking in, we had a table set up with a brand new student organization. It's the student chapter of the CSU Tourism Association, and their officers helped hang flyers and hang posters up. So obviously they're trying to get the word out about the student organization. They've got some sign-ups over there if you want to learn more about what they're doing. So help me thank them and getting the word out. So my name is Ethan Billingsley. For those of you I don't know, I'm the Director of Undergraduate Programs here in the Warner College of Natural Resources. And so we're really fortunate today to have a guest speaker join us from Denver who has taken on the position of the Director of the Outdoor Recreation Industry for the state of Colorado. And he's going to tell you all about what his office is doing and hopes to accomplish. But I just wanted to highlight a few things from his background. Luis has had a really interesting background leading up into this point. He's a 6-time summiter of Mount Everest. Only 6? Come on.
I know. I didn't try hard enough.
But he's worked for organizations like Vail Resorts, Colorado Outward Bound. He's currently still a town councilman for the city of Eagle, is that right? So he's served in a variety of capacities, so he's got some great experience he's going to share with us. So, without any further ado, please join me in welcoming Luis Benitez.
Hi, everybody. How many people were voluntold to be here today? Show of hands. Oh, that's good. You're exactly who I want to talk to. So, first of all, I want to share with you a little bit about how I got this job, because that's the biggest question that I get whenever I speak at schools. How does somebody like you end up running a program like that for the state of Colorado? I know, I see you shaking your heads, like, how is that even possible? So it is a brand new role for the state, and it's actually a brand new office within the country. There are only 3 states that currently have this office. Utah started first. Colorado was second. Washington State just approved legislation for this office. And I would say it's a coin toss between Oregon, Montana, and Idaho for who's going to come next. But New Hampshire's looking at it. North Carolina's looking at it. And the reason why is it's just an acknowledgement at the state level that the outdoor industry is a part of the economic engine of what makes a state run, especially here in Colorado. So for me, when I was sitting pretty much right where you're sitting, maybe 1 year older, I had no idea how I was going to put it all together. You've heard this story, right? It's the classic. I knew I loved climbing. I knew I loved being outside. I was a camp counselor. I was a climbing instructor. I loved to paddle. I loved to fly fish. I loved to hunt. And I had no idea how I was going to turn it into a career. Had been coming out to Colorado year after year for climbing trips, skiing trips, and here's where I got lucky. At the time, Mark Udall was the executive director of the Colorado Outward Bound School. Anybody here ever heard of Outward Bound? Yeah? Okay. So I met Mark through a couple of mutual friends, and he gave me the classic line that he's given probably a bajillion other Outward Bound instructors before me. Hey, after you're done, why don't you come on out and work for me and work for Outward Bound here in Colorado? So that's exactly what I did. Started working out for Outward Bound. In the mountain ranges and on the rivers all through Colorado and all through Utah. Loved every minute of it. Started to deepen my involvement with experiential education, trying to figure out how to make it more of a career, because as we all know, the outdoor industry is sort of seen as that cottage seasonal thing that lasts 3 or 4 months a year, and then what? Right? What are you going to do for the rest of the year? How are you going to cobble it together? Well, I went through kind of that same process. But as I was working for Outward Bound, I started to meet mountaineers from all over the world. And I also have another lucky streak in my history. My father's actually from Ecuador. So I grew up spending summers mountaineering in Ecuador and all over South America. And I started as a young apprentice guide, guiding on mountains in South America and mountains in Alaska and in Washington State, slowly building up that part of my resume. So when Outward Bound would end, I would sort of dirtbag it through South America, working as a mountain guide. and in other places, trying to cobble together my year to make it all work. But for me, the goal was always the sexy stuff you see in Outside Magazine, right? You see those pictures, we all plot and scheme, some of us rip them out and put them up on our walls because that's the image that we want to be a part of. I was no different. I wanted to figure out how to be the guy in that photo. I wanted to figure out how to be the person that was a part of that process. Now at the time, I just sort of saw it as a career and trying to connect the passion of who I was with what I wanted to do. I didn't really quite understand all of the political science it would involve, the border crossing, negotiating with foreign governments, figuring out how to take intact groups up and down really big mountains, focused on leadership, problem solving, conflict resolution. So a couple of clients who turned out to be really good friends years later somewhat became business mentors, and they said, Luis, you should really start focusing on organizational development and leadership development because that's kind of what you do. And being a young guide, I thought, well, all I do is I take you up a mountain, I take you down, and make sure you have 10 fingers and 10 toes when you're done. I don't understand how those two things connect. And they explained very clearly on mountaineering trips, you take a diverse group of people towards a very distinct goal under a really tight timeline in a highly stressful environment with a very tight budget. If that's not running a company, I don't know what is. But for years, the outdoor industry, again, has sort of been seen as this cottage, seasonal thing that doesn't get a lot of respect. But yet, when I started guiding on bigger mountains, namely the 7 summits, of which Everest is one, you have these folks that own multiple companies that have huge discretionary income. And they were turning to me as a 20-something-year-old, and as their guide, I was the boss. It was an incredibly bizarre paradigm shift for me because I was trying to figure out and understand if they're looking to me for answers, there must be something to this whole thing that everybody wants a piece of. I couldn't really quite figure it out at the time. So as my journey kept going, people think that guiding is that sexy picture in Outside Magazine, but what I tell them, international mountaineering is a lot like what you see here. It's literally and figuratively helping people manage their baggage all over the world. If they're scared, you have to figure out how to help them put it all together. If they forget their toothbrush, you have to find that corner store in a third world country and help them find their toothbrush and toothpaste. It's the logistical challenges. It's putting together the spreadsheet, and it's taking care of people emotionally and spiritually in that journey. And you also get to work with some pretty interesting staff. Anybody here ever worked with mules before? Yeah? Only 2 people in Fort Collins have ever worked with a mule before? Wow, that's impressive. So, those of you that know mules, would you agree that they're calm, cooperative creatures? Would anybody agree with that? Yeah. So, as my career progressed and I started working bigger and bigger trips, and then in my spare time nerding out on learning more about organizational development and leadership development, I showed up for a guiding trip on a mountain in South America, one of the 7 summits, Aconcagua. It's on the border of Chile and Argentina. It's almost about 23,000 feet. And at the time, I was used to being an outward bound instructor and guiding in Alaska and humping huge packs in and out for every expedition. But I show up on Aconcagua, and at the trailhead, there are all these mules ready to carry my stuff to base camp. So I thought, wow, I just got a promotion, and I get to hand this mule all of my stuff, so my job just got easier. This is what success must feel like. I get a promotion, it gets easier, I'm just going to kind of sail on through and keep going with what I'm doing. Well, about 3 hours into the walk on that very first trip on Aconcagua, my mule with his stuff on my stuff on his back decided to do that. He's not sleeping, he's actually on the verge of death, but I didn't know it at the time. So I walked over to this mule, and as the other mules were walking away and my clients were walking away, I'm thinking, I now have to rationalize with this mule and get him back on his feet. So I got an apple out of my pack, and I got down on my hands and knees, and I started talking to a mule, trying to get this guy on his feet again. And the mule driver, who looked to be about 112 years old at the time, came over, looked at me on my hands and knees talking to a mule, looked at the mule, wound up like he was kicking the final field goal for the Super Bowl, and planted one on the mule's backside. I was horrified. But the mule calmly got up, and I'll never forget this, looked at me, took the apple out of my mouth, and walked on down the trail. The mule driver said something I'll never forget. He said, sometimes, Luis, all it takes is a little kick. And I thought about that long and hard the older I got and the further I got in my career. Being a mountain guide, especially at altitude, there is nothing easy about that job. There is nothing rarely sexy about that job. Maybe you get a free jacket every once in a while. You might pick up a sponsor. You might write an article here or there. But for the most part, it's incredibly difficult physically and emotionally. And as the years progressed and I got deeper into the industry and deeper into the culture, some trips were on my own, on solo expeditions. Some trips were with clients from all over the world in various parts of the world. But for the most part, the thing I really started to focus on is how does an industry that drives so much innovation, so much passion, and so much leadership be seen as just a part-time, fringe, weirdo community? How is that possible? And so that thought really stuck with me throughout my entire career until I got to this mountain. Anybody know what that one is? Pop quiz. Everest, yeah. A little over 29,000 feet. And for any mountaineer, regardless of what you've read about this mountain, it's the brass ring. It's the peak that a lot of mountaineers try to get to and try to figure out how to go. But I really wanted to figure out, like I'm sure most people do, a unique way to get there. I didn't just want to go and try to save up all my money, sell my truck, probably sell a kidney to figure out how to go. I wanted to find a way to go and have it mean something. So about this time, I met a really special individual from here in Colorado, Eric Weinmeier, who now is the only blind person to ever climb Mount Everest. But at the time, Eric was an English teacher at Kent, Denver, here in Colorado. And he had climbed Kilimanjaro, he had climbed Mount McKinley, Denali in Alaska. We sat down to lunch and he said, Luis, I want to be the first blind person to climb Everest because I'm tired of people telling me what I can and can't do. That resonated with me. I thought, here's a project, here's a perfect example of what we're capable of as an industry and as a community, helping somebody like that figure out a problem as complex as this. So, long story short, we succeeded. We made it to the summit of Everest, came back down, and from that trip, I had everything from the overweight Texan calling me and saying, if you can take a blind guy up there, you can sure as hell take me to the summit, and wanting me to guide them, all the way to working for international expeditions and international companies, until I got a very special phone call from Guy Cotter, who is the man that purchased Adventure Consultants from Rob Hall's widow after Rob was killed on Everest in 1996. So if you've read the book Into Thin Air, if you've seen the recent Everest movie, my job was getting Adventure Consultants back to being a global brand. Because after Rob was killed in 96, they just took a really long time to try to figure out who they were and what they were within the industry. So I took over the reins of the entire organization. Now, regardless of what you read or hear about Everest, it is still the big show. It is a multi-million-dollar, media-driven city that rises and falls in Nepal every spring. So you've all dealt with statistics problems that sound like this. If Luis leaves home with 5 tons of food, fuel, and equipment and $347,000, flies 5,000 miles, rents 2 Russian helicopters, hires 147 yaks and 36 porters to walk 58 miles to base camp, how many dollars will Luis have left over? It's kind of some of those days where I would wake up, pull out the spreadsheets, realize I know my toothbrush is in a yellow duffel bag on the back of a yak, but I know that yak is about a quarter mile up the trail already. I'm not brushing my teeth this morning. Those incredibly difficult logistical challenges, the drudgery of the data entry, right, that empowered this amazing and impactful trip for others. So to Ethan's point, I've been lucky enough to summit Everest 6 times. Still have 10 fingers and 10 toes. And mostly what's between my ears still works reasonably well. I've been lucky enough to guide the 7 summits a total of 32 times. And working for Adventure Consultants and getting them back to being a global brand, for me personally and professionally, has been a highlight. Because again, it highlights this industry that was always seen as this fringe community that was only capable of so much. And so as the years passed, and as more expeditions happened and my own consulting group started to grow, focusing on organizational development and leadership development, I started asking that question on expeditions, in boardrooms, with executives, with climbing dirtbags. Why, if we're such a passionate community, are we so shortchanged out there in academia? Are we so shortchanged out there in a state's economy? We started asking these questions with, people that were representative of pretty much every walk of life. And nobody could really come up with an answer. And when I think back to my time on Everest, and yes, I still try to get out and mountaineer in Colorado and climb in Colorado as much as I can, the thing that stands out for me is really, for the first time, this office is an acknowledgement for the state of Colorado just how powerful the outdoor industry can be. The people that make up this community, I'm venturing to guess the students that were voluntold to be here, you probably have an interest in a little bit of this. Yes? No? Maybe so? You're probably thinking, what am I going to do to be a part of this community somehow, some way when I'm done? And the people that I meet all over the world, they're no different. There's this global connection of folks that try to cobble together careers because they're just as passionate about what they do and they want it to make a difference within that industry sector. So for this office, it's been going for 8 months now. And when I first joined the state of Colorado and Governor Hickenlooper asked me, hey, would you be interested in kicking this office off for the state? I went on a listening tour for all the different sectors across the state, from manufacturing to guide services to your local outfitter, talking to REI, talking to folks in different programs in academia, like programs, which a lot of people in this room are a part of. Put together an advisory council that was representative of all the different sectors within the state to come up with a mission statement. And ultimately, here's what it is. We champion industry, communities, and people to come to life through Colorado's great outdoors. Now, what does that mean, right? Mission statements, everybody's got one, every organization has one. How do you deepen that process here in Colorado? So I want to give you a couple of statistics to help you understand just how big the outdoor industry is for the state. $34.5 billion in consumer spending, with a B. That's every water bottle, every raincoat, every pair of hiking boots, every backpack. Everything you can possibly think of within that sector, from manufacturing to innovation, $34 billion. Over 350,000 direct Colorado jobs within that industry sector, and it's literally growing every single month. These numbers are already out of date depending on who you ask. $994 million in state and local tax revenue. The ski industry alone is worth $4 billion of that. So, I'm sorry, so $4 billion of the consumer spending out of 34, out of $994 million in state and local tax revenue, the ski industry is worth about 50% of that. And then $4.2 billion in wages and salaries. So, it's a significant chunk of change. And so what the state of Colorado acknowledged by my job and by this focus is, just like advanced manufacturing, just like aerospace, just like ag, just like tech, just like bio, the outdoor industry is actually a legitimate portion of the state's economy, which is pretty fun, because when you think about the definitions of what makes up our economy, they're kind of broad and they're kind of varied. So we all know the different sports that we like to take part in, the different ways we like to recreate, and ultimately everybody wants a part of what we have. This is with a couple of buddies in a bluegrass band in Telluride, and they love to hang this sign out in front of their stage, "Wish you were here," because everybody wants to be here, everybody wants a part of it. Now, I point out these little Thundercats up here in the upper right corner because I showed up to their program in a park in Denver thinking that they were going to learn how to paddle the way I learned how to paddle. So my own sort of matrix, when I was thinking about what they were about to do, I started looking around the lake for an old aluminum Grumman canoe because I figured I learned on an old beater aluminum canoe. Surely that's the way they were going to learn how to paddle too. And this little kid with the yellow hat turned on backwards, as soon as I took the picture, he looked up at me, and I asked him, "Hey, where's your canoe?" He looked at me and he said, "Canoe? I'm not going to ride on a canoe. I'm learning how to stand up paddleboard. My dad stands up paddleboard. He sups, and I'm going to learn how to sup too." That's his dad. His dad's a guide on the upper Colorado. And so when you start to talk about emerging innovation and different sectors within the outdoor recreation industry, if I would have told you that 15 years ago you're going to be able to buy an inflatable surfboard and a paddle at Costco and take it down a majority of the rivers in Colorado, somebody would have been like, "Well, that sounds fun, but how's that going to happen? How does that work exactly?" Major booming sector, both in manufacturing, in marketing, and in activity and outfitters within the state of Colorado. And it's not just fringe people. A lot of people have showed up to make this happen. So when you really think to talk about conserving public lands and waters, how we look at that, and sparking sustainable economic development, nobody wants to damage the watersheds and the waterways and the lands that they use to drive that emerging sector of the outdoor industry. So all of a sudden you've got conservation and stewardship walking hand in hand with deep, deep innovation. Everybody's coming, right? The fact you can buy a board at Costco now for $500 boggles my mind. And then it asks the question, those people are getting out on the upper Colorado, the upper sea, and floating from Rancho to State Bridge. How are they getting trained? Do they know swiftwater rescue? Are they just showing up after they bought their board at Costco and hoping not to die? A lot of people that I've met, that's exactly the case. So who's going to be responsible for driving the ethic of that industry? I think some of you guys are giggling because probably some of you have done that as well. Who's going to be responsible for that, right? How are you going to take responsibility for that industry and shaping the philosophy for what comes next? So in continuing to think about what comes next, we've always been innovative. I guarantee there's somebody in this room that's going to think of the next great outdoor widget within our community. What I want to understand is, how do we foster that incubator to help you grow and to help you bring that idea to market? That's what I'm interested in. Outdoor industry has no problem driving innovation, but I think cultivating those outdoor lifestyles and connecting that to innovation and understanding it's part of the way Coloradans do business, that's the intersection that I'm hoping to grow. Because ultimately, you got to ask a question, right? Some of you may know a joker like this. Where does innovation come from? Where does it come from? Now, if you're talking about aerospace, or you're talking about advanced manufacturing, or something like that that's deep into metallurgy, or advanced composite materials, or you need a skunk works to make it happen, that's all fine and good. Typically in the outdoor industry, it's a case of, hey, Bubba, watch this. It's somebody in their garage pulling something apart, trying to put it back together again with duct tape and baling wire, and seeing what happens. This guy, who shall remain nameless, is very, very real, lives in Telluride, put this thing together because he was sick and tired of pedaling his wife's townie bike around with this dinky little basket on the front, and he wanted to find a way to have a bigger cargo capacity instead of panniers up front on his bike. All of his friends, including me, thought he was going to kill himself, because he'd pedal this thing in and out of town with the wobbly little shopping cart wheels, like at least change the wheels, do something. But he was so passionate about this idea of changing the carrying capacity on a bike, not just for a townie bike, but also for front/backcountry access. This is ultimately what he came up with. He built this fat tire, heavy carry bike for Volunteers for Outdoor Colorado to do trail work in sort of the front country/back country. So note the chainsaw 6-pack combo on the bike with the glove pocket right between the bars. He was really proud of that front beer stand. But that's the way our community works. And for the longest time, it's, inflatable surfboard on a river, that's never going to happen. Shopping cart on the front fork of a bike, you're going to kill yourself. How can we celebrate and foster that community as opposed to just saying what you're coming up with is nuts? Because ultimately, it leads to different conversations. Now, whatever you feel about dirt bikes and motorized vehicles in the backcountry, here's what's coming. Anybody here, have you ever ridden an e-bike, an electric bicycle? Anybody in here ever ridden one yet? Right? Admit it, it's a safe place. Are they fun? So-so. Ethan's going right on. Yeah, they're good. They're good, but we haven't defined how we utilize that technology in the front country, in the back country, and on our trails. So up to this point in the outdoor recreation industry, in that sector, there's been this dividing line. The motorized people will pick up a chair and throw it at the mountain bikers because they say, you don't pay for anything, we tax every vehicle we have, we turn that over into trail maintenance and trail work. When are you going to show up to the table and help? Mountain bike community says we show up by having a lot of volunteer days and supporting our communities and our trail systems. But the emergence of e-bike technology is going to change the game. I just returned from a trade show in Europe called ISPO. It's the outdoor industry trade show for the European and Asian model. They had a whole corner of the trade show floor dedicated to e-bike technology. Whenever I talk to anybody in that sector of the floor, they said it's not a question of if this is coming, it's already here in Europe, and it's coming to the States. They can retrofit any road or mountain bike you have with this technology. Is it expensive now? Yeah. It's like a flat screen TV was 15 years ago. But over the years, that technology will become more and more affordable. They have bikes now where the battery pack it actually looks like the water bottle, where you can click it onto your pack. You get about 2 hours out of each charge. You can carry 3 or 4 in your backpack, and you can click it off and on anytime you want. So if you can't do that uphill pedal, but you want to get to the cruisers and then start pedaling again, you can turn it off and on. So not only have we not defined the sector yet from an advanced manufacturing standpoint where that industry is going to live, we also haven't defined it from a policy standpoint either. This is not going to be just me answering these questions. This is going to be your problem when you get out of here. How will you address that? How will you define that intersection? Because I have people almost every day that stand up in front of me and say, until they run out of breath, you will never, ever, 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 then they take another breath, ever, ever, ever put one of those machines in the backcountry. It's not going to happen. It's a motorized vehicle. Is it? I don't know. It's going to take our community to answer that question. Deepen the innovation, drive that conversation. So how do we connect that passion of who we are with what we do with emerging technology like that? So when you start to look at that a little bit deeper, obviously, you want to promote some of those decisions, promote that inclusive access for all. I think that's really important, but given the e-bike communication and the emergence of what's going on, you want to strengthen that stewardship ethic also. If those folks are going to show up and play, how do you connect those dots? That's super important. Because ultimately you get to a point like this. How many people in here are saying, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen? But how many of you are saying, oh my God, if I go car camping with 11 of my buddies, I have to go to Home Depot and get a rake. Dinner's done. That's perfect. Right? And it's this question. Crazy or genius? Now, you hear it all the time. Steve Jobs had a great keynote speech that he would give where he would ask that question, whereas a simple concept now is seen as crazy, right? You will never, ever, 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 ever have an e-bike in the backcountry. We won't allow it. That's crazy. In 10 years, are we going to say that's the most genius way possible to blend emerging technology, a wilderness stewardship ethic, and potentially engage a community and a sector that might not be hardcore enough to do that uphill or that big downhill. Maybe they need that little bit of a boost to click it on. How do you blend all three of those things? Crazy or genius? I'll keep pushing that question and asking you because sometimes it's just that crazy idea that shows up and then everybody around this fire, I was there when this happened. Like, oh my God, that's the best idea I've ever seen and I want one of those hot dogs. Because the definitions are changing, right? I am old enough to remember my first mountain bike, a stump jumper. I don't know if any of you had one of those old fixed tail, fixed fork. I needed dental surgery every time I got back from a ride. It was the most bone-jarring, horrific ride you ever could imagine. But now people define mountain biking as the kind of stuff you see on the screen now. Pump tracks, downhill tracks, drop seats. All those different technologies now define how we look at mountain biking. Crazy or genius that definition evolves. Crazy or genius, fat tire mountain biking in the winter, right? Gigantic balloon tires. So it's changing rapidly, and you have to be in front of that process. I tell people all the time, you have two options. It's either going to be done to you, or it's going to be done with you. What do you want to do? So an interesting concept at this point, too, within the industry, to give you an idea of how rapidly this is changing. We're all familiar with the ski industry, right? Anybody here ever ridden or skied at Vail Resorts up at Vail? Anybody been to Vail? Yeah. So when you think of Vail, really old sector of the industry within Colorado. Ski industry in Colorado is about 50 years old, a little bit older than 50 years old, actually. And believe it or not, up to the time that a recent bill was passed, did you know that snowboarding was illegal on all mountains in Colorado? Anybody know that? Yeah, you were breaking the law if you were snowboarding on any mountain before the summertime operations bill was passed. Reason why is because every ski mountain's in a national forest, and every ski mountain company has a 99-year lease between the Forest Service and the holding company that actually owns the ski mountain. And because the lease was written so long ago, snowboarding wasn't even invented yet. So they finally got to the point where they said we need to rewrite the lease, add snowboarding, but then also look at what else we could do, because believe it or not, more people touch national forests in Colorado on ski mountains than any other forest in the United States. Did you know that? So if there's that kind of an intersection, Vail Resorts as a company started looking at what else could we do if we pass this bill allowing snowboarding. Could we pass a portion of that bill also saying we can change summertime operations? So now on the top of Vail Mountain, you have high challenge ropes courses like you would find on any outward bound base camp, any OREC program at any university. They now have high challenge ropes courses to encourage people to step outside their comfort zone. It's like a commercial for Outward Bound. On a ski mountain, on Vail Mountain, they are opening in June an 1,800-foot canopy tour. 1,800-foot drop. It's basically like an 1,800-foot zip line that's going to go from the top of the mountain down to the bottom of the back bowl basin. I rode this thing as a test ride. I got to tell you, I've been on a lot of canopy tours in my time. This thing's going to take it to the next level, right? So now they're going to intersect all of these different canopy tours, all of these different cables with the lift operation system. So you ride a cable down, you get on a lift, you ride another cable across, you get on a lift, maybe you pick up your mountain bike over there, maybe you come back over here and get on another cable, maybe you do the ropes course and then slide all the way back down for dinner. And I'll never forget, I was talking to the COO of Vail, Chris Jarneau, and he said, well, we'll just hire ski patrollers and ski instructors off-season to run this stuff. It'll be easy. It'll be a summertime job for that sector of our community. And I said, yes, that's a great idea. And do you realize that you're building a brand new guiding sector for the industry? The people that run these canopy tours are going to have to know about lightning. They're going to have to know about cable evacuations to get people off. They're going to have to explain every eco zone that you slide through from an environmental perspective. They're going to have to know all of that stuff, and they're going to have to be able to deliver it safely. Congratulations, you've just built a brand new sector for guiding and outfitting in Colorado. Crazy or genius? So you have to remember, for a $34 billion industry, we've got a lot of potential, but it relies on all of you showing up with the crazy ideas. It relies on all of you asking some of those questions to take it even further. So I want to wrap it up before I turn it over to questions with a few more facts. Did you know 7.1 more million people by 2040? Did you know that? Does that scare you? Did you also know that depending on what study you've read, that it's not going to be in the urban corridor? That the Front Range will hit a saturation point, depending on what study you've read, I've seen, by about 2030. So it's going to start expanding outward. The places that we love, that we recreate on, that we want to protect, people are going to land there that are coming here. What's their ethic going to be? For stewardship, for conservation. What's their ethic going to be if they're looking for the Colorado lifestyle and that quality of life that we all love? It's a pretty big question. The next one, let's see here. Increased growth in urban and rural areas, I kind of spoke to that. It's an opportunity to define that responsibility for people that come here. If you're going to be a Coloradan, here's how we expect you to show up. It's a pretty unique opportunity because, and here's a fun statistic, over 80% of Coloradans participate in trail-related activities. And over 57% of folks that live here participate in some form of water-based recreation, whether that's tubing down the river, stand-up paddleboarding, or rafting. So that's a huge number. So when you start to talk about conservation and stewardship and how we're going to take care of it, what's the formula look like? Ultimately, you have to come up with a progression. Now, I'm sure there are a couple of ninjas in this room. Who here feels like they could ski or ride up to this thing, look at it and say, I got it. I can land it. I can stick it. No sweat. I got one. Anybody else? Come on. Really? No break. Okay. Very good of you. Bravo. I like that. Very few of us would ski or ride up to this thing and go, I got it. No problem. Stand back. I've got this. You have to come up with progression. You have to figure out the progression. You have to understand where you're starting to understand where you want to go. The outdoor industry is no different. You ultimately have to figure out what that path is going to look like. Anybody in here ever done trail work before? Would you agree it's lightweight, easy work? It's like being at a spa for the day? No? It's sweat equity. It's hard work. It's that connection to the land that you love through a process that generates, I don't know if you're like me, a lot of pride in what you're doing and how you're doing it. So understanding that it takes that path, it takes that sweat equity, it takes that progression, ultimately what we're talking about is courage. It's courage to stand up and say, you know what, if we're going to embrace the e-bike community, here's how we should look at it as a state. If we're going to embrace stand-up paddleboarding so you don't kill yourself, here's what we're going to do. Is there an emerging sector for guiding on these canopy tours? Could we develop a different degree program at a university for advanced manufacturing, retail buying, or potentially a skunk works for how to put together a bike, or molding for composite materials? What does that look like? Where does it live? So we have to invest in those resources. That's something that's really important to me, and deepen some of those educational opportunities. And I think it comes in all sectors. I'm trying to talk to universities about the potential to build an executive MBA for the outdoor recreation industry. Have all kinds of people that I talk to quite often that say, you know what, we've all heard this story. Johnny or Susie came to Colorado for school, but then they became a, and put a little blank and insert, mountain guide, river guide, fly fishing guide, horse packing outfitter, worked at REI, worked at a summer camp. We don't know what they do or how they do it, but they don't call us for money, so everything must be fine. That's okay. They're doing their thing. When I went to work for Outward Bound, my parents used to tell their friends that I was a camp counselor in Colorado. That's what I did, because they had no idea what Outward Bound was, right? But as things like REI have grown, as people understand that the industry is worth billions and billions of dollars, they want to know where our education comes from. Here's another little tidbit that I'll wrap up with. Did you know that there's right now a bill on the floor of the U.S. House to count all outdoor recreation industry jobs and revenue towards the national GDP under the Department of Commerce? Anybody know that? Do you know how much they're hypothesizing we're worth nationally? 3 to 6% of our GDP is what they're hypothesizing right now. And so I've got people, when I visit Washington, D.C., showing up and asking me, where'd you go to school? Where'd your friends go to school? Where'd your education come from? How can you be worth all these billions of dollars if you are the cottage, seasonal, recreational industry? We're not. We're a deep economic driver for the state. We're a value system for the communities that we serve. And if we understand the value of those pieces, it's not crazy. It's absolutely genius. So we have to focus and prioritize. I call the picture on the left Darwin's theory of natural selection. Anybody know jokers like that? Let's float the plug in for the stereo in the hot tub. Hope nobody gets hurt. And you don't want to read the book about prioritizing things when the boat is sinking, right? You have to read the book before that happens. Because the days of pointing at somebody else to take care of these solutions and these problems and these issues are done. Ultimately, you have to understand what your value proposition is in this bigger community if you truly want to make it shine and if you truly want to make it great. So I'm going to end with this story because it's an important one for me. And regardless of what age you are, I hope it's an important one for you. This guy's name is Pasang Tenzing. He's a Sherpa buddy of mine. He has been with me on every single expedition I've ever been on in Nepal and Tibet. He's been with me on every Everest trip, countless other expeditions. This is actually him on the summit of Everest a couple years ago. And after every expedition, I'm really excited to go down the Khumbu Valley with him and head to his house and hang out with his family, because one of my favorite people to hang out with is this guy, his dad. He looks to be about 160 years old, but he actually worked on Sir Edmund Hillary's expedition on Everest in 1953. He actually has a coronation medal from the Queen that Hillary brought back when Hillary came to Nepal to build schools after his Everest expedition in 53. And I'm always so excited to talk to him about everything his son has done, how his son has kept me safe, how talented his son is, and how much fun we've had. And he asks me the same question after the same conversation pretty much every time I go to see him. And it's the same question I'm going to ask of all of you in closing. He says, you know, Luis, that's great. Sounds like you guys have had a really good time. You kept everybody safe. Sounds like my son, Pasang Tenzing, did a really good job. But answer this question for me. How is what you're doing going to make my grandchildren's world better? How is what you're doing going to make their world more extraordinary? So I encourage all of you to keep that in the back of your mind. Every decision you make, crazy or genius, it's not about you. It's about what comes next. So thank you for listening. How are we doing on time? Good. Good? If anybody has to go, I totally understand. Got classes. If anybody has any questions, I'm all ears. Sir?
You mentioned how now conservation and stewardship is coupling with this deep innovation. And my question is just kind of hoping if you could maybe elaborate on that and some of the ways that either you are working or the state as a whole is working on increasing those conservation sort of sustainability focuses.
It is a big, big deal right now. The question was, how do you intersect conservation and stewardship and what the state's doing and what the industry is doing? And I don't know if you follow Utah politics or Colorado politics in this sector closely, but there is a certain person in Utah, his name is Rob Bishop, who is proposing a land transfer at a pretty high level. And it's been called everything from a land steal to a land grab to a land swap. And ultimately what this proposal is basically a trade. He's offering a trade of, if you want to protect all these millions of acres for, under the banner of wilderness, under the banner of recreation, we want all these other millions of acres for mineral extraction, for oil and gas. So if you're interested, we'll horse swap with you. So you've got things like that going on in places like Utah, where here in Colorado, it is the emerging technology like e-bikes, like stand-up paddleboarding, and what we're getting into with right to float issues, which is private domain. If you're floating down a river and there's private property on the side and I pull over to have a bologna sandwich, the landowner could basically come down to the shore and shoot me because I'm standing on their land. So the argument is, do I have the right to float through? So this rapid innovation in these rapid, sort of sports that are emerging in these sectors are pushing the agenda of how we define wilderness, how we define the intersection between wilderness and front country travel. And I think one of the things that it's important right now is, up to this point, it's been management by closure. Everybody said, nope, you can't get in because this just isn't allowed. And I think we're changing the definition of, well, why is it not allowed? How can we look at that? If this really does generate jobs, revenue, and interest from the state, how do we bring those two things together? Forest Service has lost over 60% of their budget to fighting fires, right? That 60% of their budget used to go for backcountry rangers, trail maintenance, all of these different things that were really important to us as a state. Colorado 14ers Initiative, it's a nonprofit that measures impact on the 14ers in our state. Huge tourism driver for our state. They surveyed 16 14ers last year. Price tag they came up with to repair the trails on those 16 14ers, $24 million right now to repair existing damage. And they're a tourism driver for the state. And so you turn around to the Forest Service or the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, and you say, hey, you used to do this, but it's the same story. We lost our budget, we don't have the bandwidth, we can't help. So that's where the nonprofit sector shows up. But I would argue that's no longer enough. Given our population increases, given the way we're growing as a state and as a community, we're going to have to find a way to deepen public-private partnerships and start to understand, do we have to look at pay to play? Do we have to look at possibly having something? A good friend of mine at Google in Boulder, it's funny, I was describing to him the Metal Ranger, and we've all seen those. It's that metal tube at a trailhead where you pay for parking, you get the little envelope, you never have $6, you only have 10. You put it in the envelope, you lick it, you write it, the little sticker, you put it on your windshield, you stick the envelope in the little metal tube, and some mystery person comes around and empties the tube at some point, someday. I said, the Metal Ranger, right? And my buddy at Google said, wow, you're really, really old. And then he said, imagine if you had the same type of terminal, but instead you had RF technology where you could swipe and voluntarily pay for the trail that you're going to be on. And that money would go back to that trail maintenance. And when you swipe, you'd get a trail map. You'd understand what every nonprofit is doing on that trail in terms of volunteer days, maybe next week, next month. You'd see all associated restaurants around that area, maybe hotels as well if you want to spend the night. And then there'd be a solar panel on top of it and a Wi-Fi antenna to transmit the data back wherever it needs to go. That's the intersection that I think we're going to have to go to with conservation and stewardship and where the industry is going. We're going to have to find a way to merge those two viewpoints to really be successful. Long-winded answer, but we have to go there because the old model doesn't work anymore. Anybody else? Yes?
Excuse me, this is going off of your friend's father every time he asks you to go back and see him. Are we using our genius or our crazy on the right path right now?
Good question. Are we using our crazy or genius on the right path right now? I think we're waking up. It's pretty cool for an old dirtbag outward bound instructor like me to see the value that people are starting to talk about our industry as it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. I never thought of us as an industry. I always thought of us as a community that took care of the things that we needed to take care of. But the value and power, it's almost like speaking truth to power. When you realize it, then you galvanize around it, then you start to get strategic, and then you start to move. I think all of those pieces are moving at a really accelerated rate from what I can see, so I do think we're using it. I'm hopeful. You guys showed up, so it's a good sign. Yeah?
Talking a little bit about the development of a new sector at Vail, I know that it's leased from the Forest Service. Is this going to create new use on the area and cause like retroactive costs that we're going to have to pay for, or is the Forest Service going to be regulating it? Like, how does that all work with the lease to land?
Great question. That was part of my job when I worked with Vail Resorts, was helping them with organizational development, but then also looking at how this bill would shift and define their operations. They've got their own in-house environmental folks that basically follow what the Forest Service tells them they need to follow. So when we start talking about looking at for some of these models that, wow, could there be a public-private partnership? How could we actually get, could we pay for our own backcountry rangers? Could we pay for our, what we need to do via swipe technology at certain trailheads, or stickering every mountain bike or every e-bike that comes out like motorized, every motorized vehicle does? They have a model and it works. They have salaried people that maintain the trails, monitor watersheds, and do all of that work. So I think they recognize the resource they have and they want to protect it, and they're also mandated by the terms of the lease. So I think there's opportunity in utilizing and scaling that model in a couple of different places. It's a great question.
Fun fact, the CSU, the sustainability folks at Beaver Creek, it's Brian.
Yep.
CSU grads. And so they're working.
Does he come up to talk? Rodine? He's a great guy.
I should have him.
Yeah.
I'd love to wrap it up maybe with one
Sure.
question, and I'm going to hog this one. I know you're working closely with outdoor apparel manufacturers and encouraging them to either locate here or expand operations here. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Why the state's kind of getting involved there and what role you play?
I think that for a long time, advanced manufacturing's kind of been seen as the cornerstone of what we do, the cut and sew community. The advanced manufacturing industry, from bikes, skis, snowboards, all those different things. I think the reason why I'm getting involved and the outdoor industry is getting involved is that there's this emerging trend around trades and the trade sector. Often in the United States, trades are seen as electrician, plumber, HVAC. There's only a couple of things that trades are being defined as. But I think the outdoor industry is looking at cut and sew, advanced manufacturing for bikes, skis, snowboards as an opportunity for a different middle path. So we're getting involved from an innovation standpoint, because if you look, there are schools like University of Utah and here also have design programs to start to look at how to work with emerging technology around different fabrics. That's changing really rapidly. So we're invested and involved because of the innovation, but we're also invested and involved because there's different emerging sectors within education as well. So I think it feeds that whole ecosystem. I mean, I'm looking down. Can I steal your pack real quick? Which, anybody here know Topo Designs? Oh, wow, yeah, sweet. Perfect. So, there's all this amazing innovation that's coming out of the state. And the cut and sew, he says all the time, I wish I could do manufacturing here. I want to do my cutting and sewing in Colorado. I can't because of X, Y, and Z. So I'm hoping to put it together so we can someday.
Before we thank you, I have a couple gifts.
Oh, come on.
We have
Really?
our branded Polar Bottle, which is a Colorado-based company. And then another hat, which is not Colorado.
Oh, take it.
But
Thanks,
it still
everybody.
has the branding from your college. So thanks so much. Thank you.